My name's Harriet. I hack your AI so the bad guys can't.
Welcome back to Harriet Hacks. I often say I missed the boat in computer hacking, so now I hack AI instead. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the US election. Don't worry, it's not going to be political. We're talking about it in terms of AI regulation, as well as talking about some other aspects of AI regulation and a bit of a who's who in the zoo. Don't worry, it's not going to be too spicy, unless you find AI regulation really spicy. But in case you don't know about me, my name is Harriet Farlow, or Harriet Hacks. I've spent a decade working at the intersection of AI and security, and I've been in AI security since 2021 after I discovered it through my PhD in adversarial machine learning. And now I run an AI security company and I talk about it. In fact, it's hard to get me to stop talking about it. So this is an AI security channel. If you want to show your support, which does mean a lot to me, this takes up so much time. You wouldn't believe it. But I think it's really important that there are more creators out there talking about AI security. So if you'd like to support me, and I can tell you it really does make a difference and help me know that this is worth it, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave me ideally a positive comment, that'd be nice. But please just engage with the discussion, engage with each other, engage with the AI security community. If you want to find me elsewhere, you can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Harriet Hacks. Look, it's not amazing, but I'm getting better. I'm really trying. And I also have a podcast with my teammate Tanya, which is very refreshing because you don't just have to listen to me. Tanya is so cool. She's an AI security researcher who also works at Maleva. And we often also have guests on, so it's quite interesting. And the podcast is a little bit more topical. Now, we haven't done a podcast yet on the US election, but we keep meaning to. It's mostly because Tanya and I are never in the same city. We all move between different cities. And so currently I'm, basically just not in the city where she is. So we do want to chat about it, but before the podcast episode, I wanted to talk about it here too. Because something that's definitely changed since I started filming this content was the entire AI, the idea of regulating AI is definitely very new. And so while there have always been a lot of policies on AI, they tended to be more about implementing AI more, like helping organizations use more AI, be more innovative for a nation's economic advantage. And now that we're starting to see more safety and security risks associated with AI, we're starting to see a lot of conversations about regulation. Now, the idea of regulating AI, just as regulating anything, and especially a technology, isn't necessarily an easy conversation. A lot of challenges people bring up is the idea that if you regulate something, then you lose the ability to innovate in it, or you might be over-regulating something when it doesn't need to be regulated, or you might be introducing regulations a bit too early on in the journey before you can actually start to see some of the real risks and potentially non-risks come about. So that's why I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the US election, because when it comes to the United States, it's a really important country when it comes to AI, because that's where all of the big tech companies are. Sure, these big tech companies always have a presence elsewhere, right? But their HQ is in the United States, and often where they do their research is there, particularly places like California, and therefore the laws that govern those nations and states will have a really big impact on those big tech companies and all the AI startups as well. And because the US is traditionally seen as somewhere that is like the cutting edge, a lot of other countries, including Australia and many others, tend to look at the United States to inform our decision making for many reasons, but also just for general alignment. And so if the United States sets a direction in some way, they have a massive economy, they have so much weight to them, we kind of look at that and we're like, yeah, we need to consider their position as part of our strategy at the very least. So I think the interesting thing about the recent US election, and again, this won't be political, so don't worry, but it might actually have quite an impact on AI regulation. So don't mind me, I'm going to refer to my notes over here so I don't accidentally misrepresent anything. But The interesting thing about the United States is that when it comes to AI regulation, it's defined currently by a real mixture of things, depending on the state. So it's currently defined by a mixture of executive orders, agency guidelines, so these can be like different departments or agencies, or sector-specific standards. So for example, financial or health-related organizations would impact their technologies and their AI, even if it's not an AI-specific regulation. So it's a very decentralized approach and it's very state-based. The most significant recent directive is President Biden's executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, which was issued in October 23. Now, other countries don't really have the equivalent of executive orders, so there might not be a one-to-one comparison or equivalent for other countries, but basically this order was considered quite sweeping and it established guidelines on AI risk management, accountability, and transparency. So, it at least set the direction for possible other laws that might follow. And we have seen since that there have actually been a number of laws implemented by states like New York and California. For example, when it comes to California, you might have heard about a few bills that were signed into law, but also one that was vetoed. So I think a lot of the attention was actually on this particular vetoed bill. So this is SB 1047 and it's called Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Models Act. Now this is actually something that Tanya and I talk about in the podcast. We talk about the California bills. So this proposed legislation aimed to impose regulations on developers of advanced AI models, which included like mandatory safety assessments, risk management, kill switches, etc., etc. A few things to note is that this only applied to very, very big models. It wouldn't have been every model. It's more the kind of model that would have been developed by OpenAI or a really big research lab. So it wasn't for everything. And the reason that Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed the bill is because he was basically worried that it could hinder innovation, or because the risks and benefits weren't quite at a state where he felt confident that this bill should be actioned. Now, again, that sort of speaks to the challenge in balancing innovation and regulation. And I mean, obviously, Governor Newsom would have received a lot of letters from AI companies over there. So I know that there would have been additional sort of political pressure from that aspect too. The thing that often gets a bit lost is that there were other bills that were signed into law. There was one that regulated AI-generated political content. There was one that regulated AI-generated actors and actresses if they were based on people who've passed away. There was another one about protecting minors from AI-generated sexual content. So there is actually quite a bit of regulation in the United States at the moment. The thing that might change with President Trump is that he is not exactly a fan of regulation in general and also AI regulation. So he plans to reduce AI regulation because he wants to foster innovation and strengthen US leadership in AI. And they call out specifically countering advancements by nations like China, which has seen quite a lot of advancements. I think they recently released the biggest open source model. We're going to insert a link here. And so Trump also includes expanding export controls against China's AI industry and increasing domestic funding for AI research and development. So it's very much focused on the economic and national security of the United States and I guess partner countries and friendly countries through their AI. They also talk about enhancing military AI capabilities and reducing regulatory constraints on its development. So what do I think about this? Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what actually happens. There have been some discussions from the Trump camp about this. And I know in the last episode, I talked about a memorandum which has recently been released. The memorandum was about advancing the United States leadership in artificial intelligence, harnessing AI to fulfill national security objectives. And it came out so sort of quickly before the election that I suspected that it was probably published just so that it could get out before any I guess before anything could hinder it, there were quite a lot of statements in there about within short periods of time actually seeing action on things like AI risk management. From a personal perspective, I understand both sides of the regulation versus non-regulation camp. I think if you are going to regulate, you do at least want to be in alignment with other nations. For example, the EU AI Act is another piece of law that is now in effect, or at least it's been passed, and it will be in effect from 2025. Like you can have penalties from 2025, but individual parts of the act will sort of come into effect on a rolling basis depending on how difficult they are. And the act is a little bit different to the California laws, I mean, in many ways, because it's wide ranging and it applies to the entire European Union. But basically, they think about AI from a risk perspective. So you can have unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, or minimal or no risk. And basically, depending on the risk of the AI system in terms of how it's used, not necessarily the technology itself, but more about its use case, that determines how you need to manage the risk of AI and what you need to do. What kinds of mitigations you need to have in place, what kind of reporting, what level of oversight it needs to have. So an example of an unacceptable risk, and they're actually prohibited, it's things like social scoring or subliminal manipulation, which is fascinating. And then high risk are AI systems in critical areas like healthcare, education, employment, and law enforcement. Limited risk are things that require transparency measures, things like chatbots. And then minimal or no risk are things like spam filters, video games, etc. And basically that determines whether you need to have transparency obligations, data governance measures, and the kind of documentation you need around the system's accuracy, bias, and security. Not to say that that doesn't necessarily not align with the United States, but I know that a lot of organizations are not exactly sure how they will comply with the EU AI Act. And just like GDPR, it's pretty wide-ranging. It applies to any organization that has a citizen who's a United States citizen. So I think it's going to be very interesting because the potential fines for the EU AI Act are really high as well, up to £30 million or 6% of annual turnover. In other states, so in Australia, for example, there's not exactly regulation, but there are discussions around, for example, we have a list of 10 guardrails that have recently come out. You don't have to do them, but many of these things are also just like aligning with like ISO and NIST standards. They're not things you need to do, but if you want access to certain contracts or funding, you might need to prove that you're ISO or NIST compliant. So it's more that sort of strong recommendation. And of the Australian guardrails, 2 of them are sort of security related, the others are more safety related. From a personal perspective, honestly, as soon as I heard about the election results, so like for Maleva, we're in AI risk management because unfortunately, we just can't get companies to care about AI security unless there's some kind of compliance obligation or fine attached. Not to speak for all companies, like some companies are doing a really good job and care about the security of their AI products, but most of the time we just weren't really, getting reliable traction from the companies that actually cared about AI security. We kind of had to tie it into risk management. So for us, the European Union and the United States are our 2 key markets, I guess, just because they have more regulation there. And so part of me, I don't know, was a bit worried. I was like, damn it, have we lost a key market? And the other part was really concerned by the potential for big incidents that might arise. Not that all regulation necessarily prevents incidents from happening, like not just that, being compliant doesn't actually mean you're secure, but it certainly helps. But then honestly, part of me was like, if there's a big AI security incident, then people might finally take it seriously. But we'll see. The regulation space is something that has changed dramatically over the time that I've been in AI security. And I'm interested to hear what you all think. Do you believe in regulation? Do you believe that we don't need regulation? How do you think we should be considering it? At this point, I've spoken about this with a lot of people, and I'm really just interested to get lots of perspectives because I think there aren't really enough people who are talking about it. There are certainly people talking about it, but maybe not from enough spaces, or maybe a lot of people don't necessarily feel like they're equipped to contribute to the conversation. So, given all this happening in the regulation space, and I know that there's a lot happening in other countries as well, this is really just a sort of a drop in the bucket in terms of the conversation here. But I'm interested to know what you think. Not necessarily about the election. Let's not make this political, but maybe other things I haven't considered about a Trump presidency when it comes to AI. Obviously, it's going to be a very pro-industry, pro-innovation approach. You never know, we might be surprised by whatever regulation efforts we see. The other thing I think is quite interesting about the United States is the difference between all the states and the federal level as well. That's not really something we see in Australia. In general, Australia is far more along the middle anyway, and it's pretty rare for different states to have vastly different laws aside from things like driver's licenses and sort of more home management, things like that. So let me know what you think. I think it's time for me to go. I'll see you next time.